Hello and welcome back to another full step-by-step PC build guide, and today I'm going to be showing you how to build a PC in the Model 8 from Geometric Future. So you might not have heard of Geometric Future. They're a pretty new company and they've actually only got two cases at the moment. This is their larger Model 8, but they've also got a smaller Model 6. And the Model 8 itself comes in a whole variety of different designs and different colours. The one that I have is the Lohan in white. So despite being a new company, Geometric Future really hasn't played it safe with the Model 8. They've gone for quite an unusual design, which is really going to make the build stand out. So we're actually going to mount our motherboard in a horizontal position, and the graphics card is going to be in an upright position hanging down from the top of the case. So whether this works or not, you're going to have to hang on to the end of the video to see. So let's take a look at the other parts I'm going to be building with today. For the motherboard, I'm going to be using the MSI Z690 Edge Wi-Fi. This motherboard comes in two different versions with DDR4 and DDR5, and I've got the DDR5 version. For the CPU, I'm going to be using Intel's 12th Gen i7, the 12700K. Keeping our CPU cool, I've got a 360mm AIO from Geometric Future. It's the Eiskimo Junior 36. For RAM, I've got 32GB of Kingston Fury Beast DDR5 at 5200 MHz. For storage, I'm going with a single Gen 4 NVMe M.2 drive for this build. It's from Sabrent and it's their Rocket 4 Plus in 2TB capacity. Powering the whole build, I've got a 1000 watt fully modular gold power supply from DeepCool. It's their PQ1000M. For the graphics card, I'm going to be using the Zotac Gaming RTX 3070 Ti AMP Holo. For case fans, I'm going to be using Lian Li's AL120 Unifans in black. And the final part for today's build is some white cable extensions from CableMod. Okay, let's get building. I'm going to make a start by preparing our case. To remove our tempered glass side panel, we've got two captive thumb screws at the back to loosen up. Once these have been loosened, the panel can be slid backwards, tilted away and lifted out. The other side panel is removed in exactly the same way. Loosen the captive thumb screws at the back, slide the panel out, tilt away and lift. The case's front panel is solid. There's probably no reason to remove it for the build, but if you do want to remove it, it simply pulls away from the front. So you can see with the front panel removed, the front of the case's chassis is just solid. So like I said, no real reason to remove this. Taking a look at the front I/O, we've got a power and reset button. We've got two USB 3.0, two USB 2.0 and a separate headphone and microphone jack. At the top of the case, we've got a mesh panel. To remove it according to the instruction manual, we need to slide it backwards and then lift it up, but it seems almost impossible to remove. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm putting quite a bit of pressure here and the case is just not budging at all. Oh, there we go. So that's it loosened up, and then I'm able to lift it up and away. Taking a look at our top mesh panel, you'll see we've got no dust filters underneath it, although the holes in the mesh are pretty fine, and the chances are this is going to be an exhaust rather than an intake, so it isn't going to need a dust filter. So taking a look at the top of the case, we've got this compartment at the top of the case to run various cables in. Our power supply is going to come here and the cable is going to run along here and out this cutout at the back. And Geometric Future do include an extension cable, so you're not going to have to worry about the length of your cables. Our motherboard is going to exit here, and it seems like quite a strange layout, but it all will become clear whenever we get into the main body of the case. Our graphics card is going to exit either here or here. We've got two different orientations for the graphics card, and again the cables from the graphics card, the cables from the motherboard are going to exit through this cutout at the back of the case. We've also got a single 120mm fan mounting slot at the top of the case. You'll notice it's not a complete circle. The reason for this is the tubes for your AIO are going to be able to pass through this little cutout here, routing again over the top of the case to where the radiator is going to mount on the rear of the case. At the bottom of the case, we've got our one and only dust filter. It's magnetically attached, so it can simply be pulled away. So giving you an orientation of things in the main body of the case, our power supply is going to go here behind the shroud. We've got a cutout here for the power supply's intake fan. Our motherboard is going to go here on its side with the I/O exiting towards the top, as I already showed you. The case will accommodate motherboards up to 8AX in size. So you can either mount your graphics card directly into the motherboard, and we've got 7 of the slots here to mount the graphics card. There's also 3 slots further towards the front if you actually want the fans on the graphics card facing towards the front. The graphics card is going to be orientated in the upright position, hanging down from the top, no matter which layout you go for. You're going to have the narrow end facing the front if you use these slots at the back, and the fans facing the front if you use these 3 slots at the front. The only side issue I'm seeing with these slots at the front is the graphics card is going to then end up very close to the tempered glass panel. So I don't think I'm going to use these for the build. I'm going to use the ones further back, but I will do some thermal testing with them mounted at the front. But my prediction is the graphics card will overheat. In terms of fan support, as we've already mentioned, you can fit a single 120mm fan at the top. At the bottom, it's either 3 120 or 3 140mm fans, and at the rear, it's 3 120 or 3 140 as well. I do have a sneaky suspicion we might be able to squeeze 4 120mm fans at the bottom, which would be my intended build plan. In terms of radiator support, at the bottom, it's up to a 360 or 280mm radiator, while on the rear, you can fit up to a 420 or 360mm radiator. At the rear of the case, we've got 2 rails for mounting our radiator on, which we're going to need to remove, fix to our AIO, and then attach to the radiator. So just before we remove the rails, you can see the cutout I was talking about. So this is where the cables from our power supply and all our motherboard cables and our HDMI or DisplayPort cables from our graphics card are going to have to exit. Each of these rails is held on with 3 screws, which we need to remove. Taking a look at our rear compartment, our power supply is going to go here, and ATX power supplies up to 220mm in length are supported. We've got a large cutout at the back of the motherboard, so if you wanted to change your CPU cooler, you should have good access to the back plate with the motherboard installed. In terms of cable routing space, it's up to 29mm, so this looks pretty good. We've got plenty of cable tie-down points and Velcro straps included in the accessory bag. In terms of drive mounting locations, we're going to be able to fit either a 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch drive on each of these removable drive trays. They're each held on with a thumb screw, and although the case comes with 4 of the drive trays included, there is space here and here for up to 6 of these drive trays. In terms of drive support, because obviously the size of them, you're going to be able to install up to 6 2.5-inch drives, or 3 3.5-inch drives and 3 2.5-inch drives, but obviously you're going to have to purchase an additional 2 of these drive trays. To remove the drive trays, it's really straightforward. You simply unscrew it, pull it forward and lift it away, and like I said, there's space to mount one here and one here. I'm actually going to leave this one off because we've got cutouts here and here which I don't want to block. Because of the quite unusual layout in this case, I'm not sure which of the cutouts I'm actually going to be bringing the cables through. Taking a look at what comes in our case accessory bag, so we've got a range of Velcro cable straps for cable management. We've got a cable extension for our power supplies cable because of the way it's going to have to be routed. We've got some spare clips for holding on our panels, and we've got a bag of screws. I'm not going to go through these individually because there's a nice diagram in the case manual which tells you which screws you use for each purpose. We're now ready to start working the motherboard, and we're going to install our CPU, the bracket for our CPU cooler, our M.2 SSD and our RAM before putting the motherboard into the case. To install our CPU, we need to push this lever down and out all the way to the top, and then we can open the socket cover. We can then lower our CPU into the socket, line it up with the notches at the top and bottom of the socket. Once we're happy everything's lined up, we can close the cover over. If we put a little bit of pressure here, quite often the black bit of plastic pops off. We'll put that in our motherboard box, and then we can close the lever. In terms of M.2 SSD sockets, the motherboard has 4. We've got 1 behind this top heatsink, 1 behind the middle heatsink, and 2 behind the bottom heatsink. And although all 4 of the sockets support Gen 4 speeds, our top one goes directly to the CPU, while the bottom ones go via the chipset, so you're always best installing your drive in the top socket if possible. Our heatsink's held on with 2 screws. We'll go ahead and remove them. We can then insert our drive into the socket at a slight angle, flatten it all the way down, and then we've got this little clip which is going to secure the drive in place. So we just put it around this way. You'll see how it holds our drive in place. Before we return the heatsink, we just need to remove the plastic protection. You might be wondering why we've got a hole in our heatsink, and this is to allow us to secure our motherboard to the case with the M.2 SSD heatsink in place. In some other motherboards, you actually have to remove this heatsink to get access to this hole behind it. So well done to MSI, this is a great idea. We're now ready to install our RAM. There's 4 slots, but we've only got 2 sticks. So it's the second and fourth one along from the CPU that we're going to want to use. So I'm going to open the clips on both sides of the RAM slots. Then we can lower the RAM into the slot, line it up on both sides. Once I'm happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure to the RAM and it's going to clip into place. And then same thing with our second stick. We're now ready to install the backplate for our CPU cooler. Importantly, make sure these are pulled all the way to the outside for our LJ1700 mounting holes. The other thing is we have some double-sided adhesive which will help stick this to the back of the motherboard. This is only a temporary build that I'm putting together, so I'm not going to stick it in place. So just a matter of lining the backplate up with the holes. There we go. Then we've got one of these standoffs to go onto each corner. Make sure you use the bag of standoffs labelled 1700. Next we can set our motherboard into the case, lining it up with the standoffs. And once we get it through the middle standoff, that's going to help hold things in place. We're then going to use 9 of these screws with a little lip around the outside to secure the motherboard into place. The next thing to do is get our case cables plugged in. Our HD audio cable is going to go in this header up at the top left hand corner. So we'll bring it through the cutout. Make sure you lined up the right way because there is a pin missing on the header and also a hole missing on the cable. Next is our USB 2.0 cable. We've got 2 headers in the motherboard, so I'm going to bring it through the cutout and get it plugged into one of the headers. Next is our front panel connectors. They're going to go into this header down the bottom left hand corner. So starting off with our bottom row, working from left to right, we've got hard drive LED positive and hard drive LED negative. Next 2 pins in the bottom row are for a reset switch. It doesn't matter which way it goes in. I'm just going to plug it in with the text facing down. Moving up to the top row, again working from left to right, pins 1 and 2 are for power LED positive and power LED negative. And the pins next to that are for our power switch. It doesn't matter again which way it goes in. I'm just going to plug it in with the text facing down. Then we've got our USB 3.0 header, which is just here. So we'll bring the cable through the cutout, line it up with the header, and push into place. And then again, pull all the excess cable through to the back. We're now ready to install our power supply. Although our power supply is fully modular, I've gone ahead and plugged the cables in that we're going to need. So we're going to need a single 24-pin connector, 2 8-pin EPS connectors to provide additional power to our CPU, and 2 6+2-pin connectors to power our GPU. I've also plugged in a SATA connector because we're going to need that to power our Unifan hub. So something else that's important, this is our power supply's intake fan. So we're going to want to have it facing the perforations on the inside of the case where it can get fresh air. So we'll go ahead and set our power supply into place. We're then going to use 4 of these larger screws to secure the power supply into place. So just before we leave our power supply, it's important we have it turned on because once the top panel is on, we're not going to have access to this switch. And the other thing is our power supply has a hybrid mode, which means when it's running under low power demand, the fan will stop spinning, reducing the noise in our build. So this, when the switch is pushed in, it's turned off. When it's out like this, it's actually turned on. So this is the way we're going to want it. Then all we need to do is plug in our power supply extension cable. And this is going to run along the back to this cutout where it's going to connect to the cable coming from the wall. The next thing to do is get our power supply cables plugged in. So our 2 8-pin APS cables are just here. We're not going to really see the cables running to the cutout just here, so I'm not planning to use cable extensions. So we can bring our cables through the cutout and then we'll get our cables plugged in. And then we can pull the excess cable through to the back. Our 24-pin cable is going to go into here, so we'll bring it through the cutout, get it plugged into the motherboard, and then we can help organise the cables using the cable combs. We are now ready to start work on the I/O, and the first thing is to set our fans onto the radiators. I'm going to install it with the tubes up the way, so I'm going to want my cables coming from the fan heading towards the back of the case, which is going to be here. And then we can use the long radiator screws to secure the fans to the radiator. Coming from each of our fans, we've got two wires. We've got a 4-pin PWM connector and we've got an ARGB connector. One of the nice things, the fans also have splitter cables where you can daisy chain all the fans together. So I'm going to take our PWM connector coming from our first fan and plug it into the PWM cable on our second fan. And also our ARGB connector into the ARGB connector from the next fan as well. And working along to the top, so our PWM connector first of all, and then our ARGB connector. Then at the top we've got this nice long PWM cable, so I'm going to plug this end into here, and then the other end of this cable is going to go into our CPU fan header. We also get an ARGB cable, so I'm going to plug the end of this connector into our ARGB cable, and then what we have is a standard 3-pin 5V ARGB header, which is going to go into one of the ARGB headers on our motherboard. We've also got another splitter cable, which is useful because coming from our pump we've got another 3-pin 5V ARGB cable, so we're going to be able to plug it into this splitter cable, and we're only going to be able to use one ARGB header on the motherboard to power all the RGB on all 3 fans and also the pump. The only other cable to mention coming from our pump is this 3-pin cable, and it's going to go into our pump header on the motherboard. If your motherboard doesn't have an ARGB header, Geometric Future also include this little controller. It's SATA powered. You're going to be able to plug your ARGB cable into here and then use this button to cycle through the effects. And in fact, actually you're going to be able to plug 2 different devices in. So you're going to be able to power your AIO plus some of your case fans or whatever else you want to use in here. The last thing for us to do is install the Intel brackets on our CPU cooler. So all we need to do is set them in under here, apply a little bit of pressure, and they're going to push into place. And then just the same thing on the other side, slide it into place, a little bit of pressure, and it's going to clip into place. So next we can set the brackets we removed from the case onto the radiator and secure them into place with the short radiator screws. Now in terms of fixing them, I'm just going to pull this as low down as I can get it and then tighten up this screw. Okay, same thing on the other side. The next thing to do is get our AIO installed into the case, and because we want our tubes at the top, we're going to have to lower it in from the top. Now I've probably spent about 15-20 minutes trying to get it lowered in with the fans on. The problem is the fan screws catch on the side of the case and it's really difficult to get it in. So I think the simplest solution is actually to temporarily take the fans off, insert the radiator down and then put the fans back on. And then we can put our fans back into place. Then we can secure the bracket to the case using the 6 screws we removed at the start. Next we can add some thermal paste to the centre of the CPU. It is included with the cooler. Before we install our CPU cooler, we need to remove the plastic protection. Then we can lower the cooler down into place, line it up with the back plate, and then we're going to want to put a thumb screw on each corner. Next we've got 2 cables coming from our pump, so the 3-pin connector is going to go into our pump header, which is just here at the top of the motherboard, so we'll get it plugged in. I'm also going to bring the PWM cable coming from our fans through and plug it into the header next to our pump header. I'm then going to bring the other ARGB connector coming from our fans through. I'm going to plug the cable coming from our pump into it, and then plug the other end into one of the ARGB headers just here. We can then connect up our Lian Li Unifans. They just simply slot together like that, and we're going to have 4 of them at the bottom and also a single fan at the top. So we can take one of these clips, slot it onto here and push into place. And also for the 4 fans that we've got together, we can set the clip into place and push. So then I'm just going to push the tubes to the side and slide our single Lian Li Unifan up at the top, set to exhaust. And then we can secure it into place with 4 screws at the top. I'm then going to pass the PWM cable coming from our Unifan back behind the fan, and we've got a fan header just here which I'm going to plug into. I'm then going to pass the excess cable in behind our top fan and pass it through to the back. We're also going to pass the RGB cable coming from the fan through to the back. Then we can install our Lian Li Uni fans at the bottom, set to intake. I've split them in two to make the installation that little bit easier. We can then join the fans up again and slide them into place. We can then screw the fans into place at the bottom. You'll notice I haven't been able to screw the fans in at either end, but with certainly enough screws in to hold it in place, and 4 fans at the bottom is not officially supported, which is why they can't be screwed in at either end. Now we can replace the bottom dust filter. I'm then going to pass the cables coming from our Uni fans through this cutout to the back. I'm then going to bring our PWM connector in behind our 24-pin cable, and we've got a system fan header just here I'm going to plug it into. You'll notice our cable here is just popping up, so what I'm going to do is use a cable tie to secure it at the bottom. So that definitely looks a bit tidier. So then we need to connect the RGB up to our Lian Li Uni fan hub. So we're going to plug one of the fans into channel number 1 and the other fan into channel number 2. Now you can also plug the PWM connectors from the Lian Li Uni fans into here rather than the motherboard. I have done this in the past and I have found it didn't really control the fan speed properly, so I much prefer to plug the PWM cables directly into the motherboard. So coming from our Unifan hub, we've got a SATA connector, so we're going to need to plug this into the SATA cable coming from our power supply. And the only other cable we need to plug in is this USB cable into one of the USB 2.0 headers on our motherboard. There is an additional splitter cable you can plug in here. One goes to a system fan header, the other goes to an ARGB header on your motherboard. Only reason to plug that in is if you're going to plug your PWM connectors into here, which we haven't done, or if you want your motherboard's ARGB to control the lighting on the fans. I'm happy to use Lian Li's L-Connect to control the lighting, so I'm just going to plug the USB cable in. So I'm going to pass it through this cutout here, and then we can get it plugged into your other USB 2.0 header. We are now ready to install our graphics card, so we're going to need to remove the second and third expansion slot cover. And then we can open the clip in the top PCI expansion slot. We can then slide our graphics card into place, lining it up with the slot. Once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure. It'll clip into place and the slot will close. And then we can secure the graphics card into place using the 2 screws we removed earlier on. We can then plug in our PCIe cables. Okay, last thing to do is some cable management so we can get the side panels back on again. So that's our build complete, and I'm really delighted with how it turned out. It's great to build something completely different. I've gone ahead, as you can see, and set the PC up. I haven't recorded those steps. The reason I haven't done that is I used another MSI motherboard in my Fantex P500A build. It was the Z690 Tomahawk, and the process for setting this motherboard up and that motherboard is going to be exactly the same. So if you don't know how to install Windows 11, the programs and drivers you're going to need, set up your RGB software, even update the BIOS, you're going to find everything you need in that video. I didn't use the Lian Li Uni fans in that video, but if you check out my Lian Li 011 Dynamic Evo video, you'll see how to set those up. What I'm planning on doing now is a full case review. This case is so unique, I want to spend a wee bit more time going through it. I'm going to share my thoughts on having built in the case, what I liked and didn't like about it, and importantly, of course, the temperatures. I'm going to show the temperatures of this particular build. I've also got to move the graphics card to the front, where the fans are facing the front, and I'm going to turn the fans on the radiator to exhaust and share the temperatures of that. And I have actually already done the temperatures, and you're probably going to be surprised by the results of these. So you are going to want to check out that video. You'll find a link to it in the description. Okay, so hopefully you have enjoyed this video. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up. If you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.